Greetings, finders of both paths and stars. Nice to see you again on drift lanes to distant worlds. Today we head to Verces, the 5th planet from the Sun in the Galarian system, and the first planet that has no easy real-world comparison. Obviously, the presence of magic and aliens has made all these worlds very different from the ones in our solar system, but there are some obvious comparisons you can make. Abalon, Castrovel, and Akaton map pretty cleanly onto Mercury, Venus, and Mars. But those are all the inner planets. It's all asteroids and gas giants from here on out in our world. But that's not true in the Galarian system. We have quite a few more stops before we hit the big gas balls, and there are some weirder locations in there. Today we arrive at Verces, a planet that is tidally locked. We went over what this means when we talked about the moon, but as a quick refresher, the planet rotates on its axis at the same rate it spins around the sun. So one side always faces the sun, and the other never faces the sun. As I'm sure you can imagine, this is certified not good for the environment. Verces doesn't experience day or night, nor does it have seasons. It technically has years, though those are 3 times longer than the Galarian standard, but marking them is tricky since there's no real way to tell you've gone around the sun. How will life and civilization develop on a world like this? Let's take a look and find out. Distant worlds of the past, Verces, the Line. The Line is a very appropriate title for Verces because only a thin strip of land is suitable for most life. It runs perpendicular to the planet's equator, with the east side of the line facing towards the sun and the west side facing away. Though Verces has a breathable atmosphere, it's a lot thinner than Galarian's and doesn't retain or reflect heat very well. So the sun side constantly bakes and the dark side freezes as the heat radiates out into space. That thin line between the two hits a sweet spot, not too hot and not too cold, allowing for life to flourish. Because the band is so narrow relative to the planet, only one major species has arisen on Verces. The Versites are humanoid in shape, usually standing around 8 feet tall with gangly-looking proportions. Their most distinctive feature is their eyes, which are all black and bulge slightly from their head. Think kinda like mouse eyes. Their skin is also unique, able to change its pigmentation at will. This is likely less about camouflage, like you might find on a chameleon or a squid, and more about the regulation of solar exposure. The amount of sun you see is dependent on how far east or west you go, and Versites that travel throughout the band need to be able to reflect or absorb more sunlight depending on their environment. Verces has several nations all along the planetary ring, and while the nations can be very different, they all have quite a lot in common. Many of the borders settled into place a long time ago, facilitated by the environment effectively drawing 2 sides for them. A nation doesn't have to stretch entirely from east to west, but most of them do. This means that each one can only possibly border 2 others, one to the north and one to the south. This actually makes war a pretty bad idea if you think about it. You almost never want to be fighting on 2 fronts, and definitely not 2 fronts on the extreme end of your territory, but focusing on one border means the other is basically undefended, so it makes a lot more sense to just work with your neighbors rather than go conquering. As a result, the major countries in the habitable part of the planet are all part of a government coalition called the Ring of Nations. Every large country on the planet is a member, and each member works together to ensure the best for the world overall while still protecting their own identity and personal interests. The system is far from perfect, but it has kept the peace for well over 1,000 years and allowed the Versites to cooperate on several planet-wide projects. Arcane rail systems run the length of the planet, taking people between nations easily. While every member enforces their own laws in their own way, the system as a whole has the stewards to act as protectors. A military force that draws from all member nations, the stewards protect the Ring of Nations from any monsters or rogue attacks coming from the planet's more extreme environments. They also work to settle disputes and keep the peace between the various member nations, though need for that rarely arises nowadays. Because of both the lack of large-scale conflict and the pressures of the extreme environments present on their planet, the Versites have developed a much higher level of technology than other civilizations in the system, mostly focused on personal augmentation. This has resulted in the creation of 3 castes in Versite society. These castes and the rules around them transcend national borders, so a member of one caste is treated roughly the same no matter what nation they find themselves in. As I said, there are 3 of these castes, and a Versite is not born into one, but rather allowed to choose their caste once they reach the age of 16. The simplest to explain are the pure ones. These Versites reject any kind of augmentation to their bodies and eschew more advanced technologies, though they are more accepting of magical abilities. This isn't a judgment against those that do augment themselves, rather it's an expression of personal choice. Contrasting them are the Augmented, who basically do the opposite. The Augmented use advanced technology and magic to upgrade their bodies, from simple things like thermal vision to extreme cases like retractable robot limbs with onboard weapon systems. Due to their enhanced abilities, the Augmented make up most of Verces' military forces, be they National Reserves or the Stewards. The final caste are the God Vessels. These Versites devote themselves fully to a single deity, using their own body as a canvas to show their conviction. While arcane magic is often practiced by both other castes, only the God Vessels practice divine magic. Now you might have noticed there's a bit of an imbalance here. The Augmented and the God Vessels both seem like they'd have a lot more power than the Pure ones would, with the advanced tech and magical access. Yet while all these castes are theoretically equal, the Pure ones tend to be the ones running the governments. Why is that? Well, largely it's because of long-standing traditions regarding marriage. Specifically, Augmented and God Vessels must marry a Pure one. In theory, Pure ones can also marry other Pure ones, but that's fairly rare. Through this system, the Augmented and the God Vessel's power is balanced out by the presence of their Pure One spouses, ensuring balance and harmony. Of course, this isn't a perfect system. For one, there isn't any societal path towards changing castes. Once you pick one at 16, you're there for life. I don't know about most of you, but I wouldn't trust my 16-year-old self to pick out a good dinner, let alone my social station for the rest of my life. Secondly, there's nothing that ensures an even distribution of people between castes, which can make finding a compatible partner rather difficult. Which is to say nothing of the possibility of falling in love with someone in a caste you aren't allowed to marry. Certain nations have worked around this by developing a practice called plural marriages. Basically, two people who want to be together but can't marry will both marry a third person of the appropriate caste, which allows them to be together while observing proper custom. Sometimes this is a matter of convenience, but it's not uncommon for all parties involved to just love each other equally. There has been some pushback against this system in recent years, largely from the nation of Kashak. The Augmented here are pushing more and more to break from the Pure ones, believing that their anti-tech ideas are simply holding the planet back from the progress that could be possible from embracing greater amounts of augmentation. In other nations, the Augmented are generally kept in check both by the God Vessels and the Pure ones, but Kashak has gotten the God Vessel caste on their side, which has altered the usual balance considerably. The Augmented caste numbers are growing more and more here, and they are eager to push further. Their neighbors are looking on with trepidation and a bit of wariness, in case the ideology here spreads and destabilizes their society too. Now, Verces' advanced technology doesn't just extend to body augmentation. I've mentioned an arcane rail system that circles the planet, but they haven't stopped there. Having filled as much of the planet's surface as they could, the Versites inevitably turned their sights in the only other possible direction: up. That's right, this planet actually has starships. Nothing nearly as advanced as what we'll see in Starfinder's time, but still starships. These rely a lot more on magic to help them function, and they can't travel much beyond the planet, since there's no faster-than-light travel, but the aetherships of Verces are paving the way towards a future in the stars. Facilitating this is one of the greatest wonders on the planet, the Skydock. Tethered to the world by cable, this satellite orbits near the equator and functions as a dock for existing vessels and shipyard for developing new designs. Maintained by all the nations within the ring, the Skydock serves as a launching point for the most daring of Versites to head out into the universe and see what's out there. It also, very rarely, receives visitors from elsewhere in the system. Most often it's the residents of the diaspora, which we'll talk about in another video, but anything is possible. We've talked a lot about the ring, but there are two whole giant sides to the planet to talk on as well. The sun-facing side is a scorched desert called Fulbright, while the frozen half is called the dark side. The transition between these areas and the habitable zone is pretty gradual. It's not like an exactly harsh cutoff line. These zones can also shift a little bit, as even tidally locked planets experience a bit of orbital wobble. For those Versites that don't want to join the Ring of Nations, they gravitate towards these transitional zones, making a living for themselves on the frozen tundra of the ice or the harsh desert sands. The civilized nations of Verces call these the Outlaw Kingdoms, derisively lumping them in with criminals and outcasts that don't fit with proper society. This is a very broad generalization, as most outlaw kingdoms are small and disconnected from both the rings and each other, so there's not much commonality there. As we've seen with planets like Abalon and Akaton, the extreme conditions found on these parts of the planet aren't impossible to survive in. Fulbright more closely resembles both those worlds, being a harsh desert. The constant sunlight brings extreme heat and radiation exposure, which certain animals and plants have adapted to. A lot of creatures blend the two, being capable of photosynthesis and grazing on other plants. The sun sitting at a relatively consistent angle in the sky means that mountains and hills also provide consistent shade spots for oases and settlements. The few Versites that live out here often wear outfits that are highly reflective to keep the heat out and scare off predators that roam the dunes. Closer to the ring, many nations have gigantic farms of solar panels to harvest the abundant energy, manned by highly paid workers that keep the power stations safe from Outlaw Kingdom raids or attacking dust mantas. Deep in the blistering desert is Cadell, the area of the sun. Living here are large bird creatures seemingly made entirely of steel, ruled over by humanoids with artificial wings made of the same material. The prevailing theory is that the people here are rogue augmented that fled into the desert, but there's no real proof of that. Occasionally, the metallic birds will kidnap Versites from settlements near Fulbright and bring them back to Cadell, though no one truly knows why. Though the Ring of Nations hasn't made official contact with Cadell yet, they have flown over it in aetherships for scouting, which reveals some kind of large temple structure at the top of the spire. Opposite Fulbright is the dark side, where water is frozen solid all across the surface, night never ends, and the frigid wind howls across the tundra. This place is also full of its own kind of life, with very different priorities from what lives on Fulbright. Closer to the ring, the water is salty and warm enough to stay liquid, and small villages dot the coast. Farther in, the surface water freezes, and anyone trying to survive is forced to burrow down into the lightless glaciers, until the water once again turns liquid. I would advise against this though, as this far out into the frost is where truly monstrous creatures lurk. Called blood brothers, these hideous things grab travelers and subsume them alive, using their captive circulatory systems as a source of blood and warmth. Victims of this can survive for quite a while like that, which is a fate far worse than death. Far out onto the ice, into the deep dark of night, the ascetics of Nar live in the fastness of the ordered mind. This temple and the monks within hold a lot of knowledge, though their practices turn many off trying to access it. They believe the crystal structures you see in ice and snow hold secrets to the very order of the universe itself. They carve intricate patterns into their bodies with sharpened ice, then use the warmth of their bodies and blood to melt said ice, suffusing their wounds with the remnants of that order. Frostbite, and the resulting loss of extremity, is seen as a mark of honor, and many of the adherents will spend extensive amount of times out in the snow, slowly losing more and more of their body to the biting cold. Once someone has lost all their limbs to this process, they are taken deep below the monastery where they are joined somehow with others who've met a similar fate. However, a small number of these are instead sold off to Skydock, where they are hooked into the Aether ships. This process greatly aids the ship in navigation, though some of the crew find this a bit unsettling. Verces is defined by extremes, and the balance between them. The planet is in a very unique position, and its ecosystem and cultures reflect that. It would be easy to see the limited habitable locations on the planet as a hard limit. Stay within the lines, don't venture farther, or else you're gonna die. The rigid caste system reflects some aspects of this, but at the same time the very idea of the augmented and the Aether ships defies it. Stepping outside the lines is dangerous, yes, but it's also how you make progress. And as we move into Starfinder, Verces is about to make a lot of progress. Drift Lanes of the Future, Verces, the Line. Yeah, they didn't change the planet's little title between the past and the future. I guess it just fit that well. Actually, that doesn't happen for any of the planets going forward, I think. If I'm wrong, just forget I said this. Verces remains tidally locked, so the geography hasn't undergone any massive changes between Pathfinder and Starfinder. Fulbright is still a burning desert, constantly baked by the sun, and the dark side remains frozen in eternal night. But the Verthani have made good on the promise of Skydock to move up and out into the stars. Verces is a highly influential member of the Pact Worlds, being responsible for the very formation of the idea in the first place. The Pact Worlds government is built on the foundation of the Ring of Nations, and the stewards were lifted wholesale from the planet and expanded to galactic peacekeepers. This planet was at the forefront of technology before the gap, and they are not about to rest on their laurels. Verces didn't get where they are by remaining stagnant. The rigid caste system that defined the culture has largely fallen by the wayside as the necessities of modern life make embracing augmentation all but inevitable. The pure ones in the god vessels haven't completely died out, as some nations still stick to the system and individuals are free to follow any tradition they like, but things like marriage requirements have mostly been abolished. The plural marriage system is no longer necessary to get around cultural restrictions, but many Verthani have embraced it for the freedom it offers, as well as the economic and political power that can come from uniting businesses through a tight interweb of marriage. Verthani augmentations have spread to other species throughout the Pact Worlds, and many consider themselves part of the augmented, even if it no longer has the same societal connotations it did in years past. The Verthani embrace these new members, opening up their world to all comers who want to learn from them. All the species from the Pact Worlds can be found on the planet, both as visitors here to learn and immigrants making a home. Though welcoming, the Verthani can also be a bit smug about how much the Pact Worlds has drawn from their culture. A very, we were doing this before it was cool mentality. The Ring of Nations still exists, made up of the 27 nations that exist in the most habitable parts of Verces. Space travel and improved technology make the planet more open and connected than ever, and you can take a bullet train from one pole to the next without having to stop in between. The nations still retain their own cultures and identity, but Verces is a lot more homogenous than other planets. The Verthani also have a tendency to be a little bit hipster about this part of their planet too, at least in my opinion. You know, kind of a I'm not from New York, I'm from the Upper East Side kind of attitude. Like, okay, I get it, specificity is nice, but you're just kind of being pretentious about it. We don't have a full list of all 27 nations, but we do know a little more about some of them, so let's zoom in a bit, shall we? It used to be that the first nation anyone was likely to see on Verces was Obarshi. The anchor for Skydock is located in the mountain here, which is the entry point for any goods being shipped onto or off the planet. This is less necessary now, since modern ships can more easily transition in and out of the atmosphere without specific launch pads. With shipping no longer needed to funnel through here, many of the transport docks and warehouses have been abandoned. To combat this decline, the nation has shifted its focus. Obarshi still wants to be your first port of call on Verces, and it has the best in accommodations and entertainment to entice any interested visitors to make it their first stop. While Obarshi has seen some decline, Skydock has not. The space elevator is still in use, though it functions more as a convenience than a necessity nowadays. The shipyards built around the satellite are still in use and have expanded extensively to accommodate the increased demand. Where it was once a small, crowded military installation experimenting with the idea of space travel, now Skydock is an industrial hub producing everything from commercial freighters to specialized racing ships. Many visitors to Verces never even land on the planet, simply visiting Skydock to do business before departing. Shore leave for crews on Skydock can be quite a party. Back down on the planet, moving south, we have the nation of Vimal, the largest nation in the Ring. While every nation in the Ring is considered an equal, in the same way that Absalom Station is seen as the central headquarters of the Pact, Vimal is the central headquarters of the Ring of Nations. The Steward's original headquarters of Peace Watch can be found here, along with the capital city of Kuvakara, where the Grand Assembly meets. Vimal is also home to several monuments that seem to commemorate the founding of the Ring of Nations, each bearing an inscription espousing strength and unity and honoring some ancient sacrifice. Each of these obelisks also holds its own unique rune that, while clearly magical, has no known meaning or purpose. Because our map picture wraps around, we're going to start moving up the other side now. That takes us to Kashak, which has kind of won the conflict they were starting back in the pre-Gap era. The Augmented are basically in charge of Verces now. Kashak now sits on the cutting edge of cybernetic augmentation technology, being home to some of the Pact world's biggest corporations. The nation's leaders, the Supremacy Collective, have augmented themselves to the point they now work more like biological servers, immortally wired into buildings that direct the nation around them through proxies, drones, and cybernetic communications. Kashak has massive amounts of wealth and power, which attracts all kinds of enemies, from traditionalists that believe the augmentations have gone too far, to hackers of all color that rebel against their near monopoly on the augmentation market. Now, duality and contrast are both big themes on Verces, and you can find both in the twin nations of Thapulkar and Ulkothra. The contrast comes from their proximity to Kashak, as both nations are much more conservative and traditional. The old caste system is still heavily enforced here, with Augmented being comparatively rarer as a result. This has an interesting knock-on effect, as while the augmentation is less popular, technological advancement is still encouraged. This makes Thapulkar and Ulkothra Verces' premier experts in robotics and mechanical suits. Thapulkar uses these tools to assist in agriculture, while Ulkothra's more mountainous climate focuses on mining operations. To the north is Shabu, one of the most idyllic natural locations on the planet. Scholars believe that the Verthani civilization first developed here before spreading out around the Ring. The nation is less a country now and more like a historical site, with massive parks, remote villages, and ancient temples preserved as vacation destinations and archaeological sites. The crown jewel of these are the Enigma Keeps, which seem to have been constructed by ancient Verthani even before the existence of the Ring of Nations. The old stone buildings are a treasure trove of knowledge, seemingly by design. These hallowed halls are locked tight by magic and can only be opened by solving, of all things, a puzzle. If there's a connection or a line of reason behind these puzzles, no one's figured them out yet, as many seem to be just straight-up nonsense. But when they are solved, a new location opens for adventurers to explore, eager to find the knowledge hidden within, if they can make it past the traps and ancient monsters that have also been preserved inside. And this brings us back around the Ring to Athalo, a nation situated along the River Sea, a body of water that winds from the Ring into the majestic fjords of the dark side. Pre-Gap, the nation was home to many sailors, a good number of which engaged in a bit of buccaneering when the fancy struck them. In the age of starships, these sailors have transitioned to starship pilots. The pirating thing hasn't stopped, it's just shifted towards a more business-oriented strategy. A corporate raider is still a kind of raider, after all. Though, funny enough, the people of Athalo are also legendary for their generosity, as a way to balance their scales, as you might say. The capital of the nation is actually a floating city made up of many thousands of ships that still follows an ancient route through the River Sea, from when hunting dangerous aquatic predators named Miracos was a necessity rather than a tradition. And speaking of tradition, there is one that many people on Verces use to mark the passage of time in a world without days or seasons. Traveling around the planet is the River of Returning Joys, which is not a literal river, but a large migrating caravan that wanders between the nations of the Ring, bringing celebration and festivities to anywhere it stops. Before the Gap, the river was a source of cultural exchange and news from farther along the Ring, but that's much lower priority now that space travel and high-speed rail make crossing the planet about as fast as running across town. Instead, the river is just a fun traveling carnival full of magic and wonder that arrives in town bringing joy to everyone. Or, well, mostly everyone. There are some that feel the disruption the river causes is no longer worth it, and they whisper that the anonymity of the masked travelers could be hiding anyone, including dangerous criminal elements. Personally, I think they just hate fun. Better technology and augmentation have made the far more extreme halves of Verces more inhabitable than ever. Outlaw kingdoms still exist on the borders of the Ring, still filled with outcasts, dissidents, and anyone that doesn't want to fall in line with the Ring of Nations' way of doing things. Most Verthani consider any nation that isn't part of the Ring to be an outlaw kingdom, painting them all with the same barbaric brush. To the people living in these lawless nations, the truth is a lot more complicated. Raiders, traditional nomads, fringe religious compounds, and everything in between live out here and rarely appreciate being all lumped together. Quite a few retaliate by raiding the large solar farms the ring maintains in Fulbright, which prompts greater security from Verces corporations in turn, which is kind of a bad cycle. There are two groups living in the Fulbright that do not fall into the category of outlaw kingdoms. The first are the Strix that occupy the area of the sun in Cadell. The steel-winged birds and strange humanoids that occupied the spire vanished at some point during the gap, with most believing they simply went extinct or were wiped out by the stewards as technology outpaced them. The Strix who live here now originated on Lost Galarian and immigrated to Verces at some point after the world disappeared. They are far less isolationist than Cadell's previous occupants, but they are still reluctant to let outsiders see inside the spire they now call home. A much larger group living in Fulbright are the Shirin. The insectoid species arrived in the Pact Worlds a few decades after the gap, and they first made contact with the Versite Aether ship named Third Chance. After some negotiation, the Shirin were allowed to land on Verces, where they were given sanctuary. Perhaps taking this a bit literally, the Shirin founded the city of Sanctuary. Most of the population migrated into the Ring or out into the Pact World, but Sanctuary and its satellite cities are one of the biggest centers of Shirin culture in the system. To the south, Fulbright's open desert is full of raider gangs that squabble with each other for territory, resources, and whatever else they've decided they want that day. These lawless gangs, collectively known as Rust Runners for their archaic combustion engine vehicles, respect strength above all else and bow only to one authority, the Iron Fist of the Wrecking Court. Made up of the 5 people tough enough to say they belong there, the Wrecking Court accepts tributes at the camp known as Camshaft, where raiders from all across the desert come to settle any disagreement that they can't just solve by shooting each other first. This is usually done by formally shooting each other in an arena, which makes it more official, you see. Camshaft is divided between each member of the Wrecking Court, and the gangs here get along like oil and fire. Only the need to keep the camp minimally functional has prevented an all-out war from erupting multiple times. The rest of Fulbright generally lives in the shadows of the various mountain ranges, where the tidally locked nature of the planet guarantees consistent shade, making the shadows prime real estate. One such group is the Yisbo clans, nomadic groups that ride giant serpentine creatures into battle. They mostly live around the Amokishu Mountains and only have one permanent settlement. Mefentra is home to the clan's elder shamans, who maintain the nearby graveyard that all clans use to dispose of their dead. Since this is a desert, the dead aren't buried so much as just tossed in and left to sink. So there are a few markers showing where a specific person rests. The few that do exist are maintained via magic for the most honored of clan members. Outsiders probably think that an oasis in this kind of desert would be hotly contested territory, and are often surprised to hear that there are several throughout Fulbright that are almost entirely avoided by the desert clans. Full of strange and crumbling ruins, these surprisingly lush spots are the subject of many mysteries. When asked about them, the clans have many contradictory stories, though 2 common elements are something called the Petal War and a price that was not worth what was paid. Explorers that have looked into the oases report finding a lot of symbols related to the eldest of the First World. Microportals to that plane are likely what sustain these places, and if they could be expanded, Fulbright might end up resembling the rest of the Ring. Unless the price is indeed too high. Are you getting hot? Because I'm getting hot. Let's cool off the most efficient way possible by heading west into the dark side, where the sun never shines and the ice almost never melts. Any liquid water here is either deep below the surface, or else too salty to freeze in the twilight band close to the Ring. Massive desalination plants operate here, supplying the farmland in the habitable zone with fresh water needed to grow crops. These plants, and others like them, operate as charter cities under the jurisdiction of the corporations that manage them, which is a recipe for corporate exploitation if I've ever heard one. There is actually a surprisingly large number of corporations operating out here. Many tech companies, for example, take advantage of the naturally low temperatures to cool gigantic server farms. The strangest operations out here, though, are the drilling ones, that tunnel deep below the glaciers to reach deposits of ice. Not just any ice, you can find that around anywhere. This ice, found only here, is called Shelinium. Supposedly the frozen tears of the goddess Shelyn, which she shed after witnessing the thing her brother had become when Zon-Kuthon returned to the universe. This ice has multiple unique properties. It can cure a broken heart, act as a superconductor, and who knows what else, making it incredibly valuable. You'll want to be careful when drilling down, though, because the horrifying blood brothers are still around and still horrifying beyond all reason. They are most often used by parents as boogeymen to frighten children, but to anyone that lives on the dark side, they are a frighteningly possible threat. Most wander the tundra alone, but a large group is known to occupy the Kirori Caves near the World Belt Mountains. The caves have been quarantined by the planetary government since their discovery nearly a century ago. With no one going in, you'd think the Blood Brothers would disperse, since they need a source of blood to augment their own circulatory system. But they haven't. The caves are still home to a massive number of them. No one is quite sure what this means, but an unsettling possibility is that there's something deep beneath the ice that they're using as a blood source. And if it's big enough to support that many of them, it must be massive. The counter theory is that it's something else that scares me a lot less, which I'm personally 100% behind. On the subject of weird ice caves, to the north of here is the Singing Rifts, which are named for the haunting flute-like melodies that echo for miles around them. These sounds are caused by tunnels dug into the ice canyons that crisscross the whole area. The tunnels' origins are unclear, and inside them are designs carved into the ice that don't resemble anything produced by the Verthani or any known Pact World species. Legends speak of ancient machines that can be found in the deepest of these tunnels, machines that if activated will cause Verces to do something it has not done in millennia: spin. Okay, technically the planet does still currently spin, because it rotates on its axis at the same rate it rotates around the sun, so it just appears to stand still, but you know what I mean. There's no proof that this could be possible, though a few small pieces of alien technology have been discovered from the Singing Rifts in the past. The dark side isn't all horrifying blood monsters and weird flute tunnels, though. There are actual villages and settlements out here. Most are so small they aren't worth mentioning, but White Wave is somewhat notable. Positioned close enough to the ring that it could be part of the nation of Athalo, the village has refused to join the Ring of Nations, preferring to remain independent. That's a difficult prospect, with raiders and dangerous predators roaming the tundra, but White Wave has erected a defensive laser battery that seems to be working pretty well. They fund this, and the rest of the things the village needs, by processing a fish found only in this region of Verces into a powerful sedative, which they sell off to pharmaceutical companies. Lastly, we return to the fastness of the Ordered Mind, where the ascetics of Nar still reside. Their practices are the same as they were pre-Gap, including the practice of allowing frostbite to consume their limbs as they meditate in the extreme cold. Those who complete the process are called the Clarified, and they continue to have a place of honor among the Order. Those that aren't wired into starship systems to act as pilots are taken deep below the temple, to be added to a vast living neural network that communes with the crystalline patterns of the universe to divine hidden truths. Their morbid practices and self-mutilation lead many to believe the Order is associated with the gods on Chthon, including the Church of said god, though the ascetics deny this to be true. Now that I think about it, it is kind of interesting that deep ice associated with Shelyn can be found on a part of the planet occupied by an Order many think worships her brother. Probably a coincidence. Modern Verces hasn't seen much upheaval in recent years. Corporations still have a lot more power than they should as progress marches ever forward, but that's nothing new. They have seen a large influx of Vesk refugees in the last year, as the Veskarium has entered a new war with another galactic force. Some of the more paranoid are concerned that these refugees are, in fact, spies attempting to steal Verces' cutting-edge secrets, but they're not in the majority position. The recent drift crash also caused a bit of disruption in the starship development, as fears of the drift being down for longer made some pivot back to traditional Aethership development. Since the plane has been rebooted and stabilized, that fear has mostly died down, but there are some who still wonder, maybe we should divest from drift beacons just in case. Another recent galactic event that we'll touch on at the end of this series has caused a disturbance among the more psychically attuned of the planet. While not uncommon given the nature of this event, the amount of it happening on Verces is perhaps notable, since the world isn't known for its abundance of scions. If you'd said this about Castrovel, where everyone and their cousin is telepathic, I'd be less inclined to find it notable. But on Verces, I don't know, something about that just seems off to me. Verces is a neat planet. The whole tidally locked thing tickles my world-building brain in a fun way, and the culture of personal augmentation has a lot of cyberpunk vibes to it. At the same time, it's kind of a different feel from the neon-soaked streets of somewhere like Morrow on Akaton or Absalom Station's various tunnels. There's a natural world all around you with exotic wonders waiting to be experienced. You can do corporate espionage that leads to cosmic horrors in a frozen office before riding off into the desert to battle raiders in a car chase, and still have time to stop by Milliways for breakfast. Thank you for sticking with me as we rode the line and took a look at the planet Verces, my Finder friends. The fact that it has cyber enhancements and starships in both time periods makes this planet one of the more interesting ones to explore, in my opinion. The Starfinder version keeps the ahead-of-the-curve feeling without going full-blown, we're just better than you, which can be a hard line to walk. Our next video is going to probably be a lot shorter, as we have a good bit less to talk about with our next destination, quite literally. But that has to wait, as we're done here for now. Thanks again for watching, check out the socials linked below, and until next time, keep your eyes on the stars, and explore, report, and cooperate.